The young daughter of a farmer who owed taxes was seized and tortured. Furious with grief, the father and his friends killed the local governor, and the whole village, samurai, peasants, and Christians, rose in revolt. Soon the whole area was in the hands of the rebels, nearly 40,000.
So what began as a social upheaval, a social revolt against the tremendously harsh taxation against the peasants, leaving the peasants almost starving, what began as that somehow developed into a Christian rebellion.
A European merchant reported on the rebellion.
A few days after the outbreak, the Christians joined the farmers. They cry out throughout the whole country that the time had now come to revenge the innocent blood of so many Christians and priests, and that they are prepared to die for their faith.
The rebels swarmed into an abandoned castle surrounded on 3 sides by the sea. Feeling protected, they brought in their wives and children and barricaded themselves inside.
This was very upsetting. The peasants, who were the lowest of the low, the poor people, they had no right to rebel. And not only have they rebelled and revolted, but they were doing darned well militarily. And so no wonder the shogun was worried about this, because this might set an example to other parts of the country that had become unsatisfied with the crushing taxes which the peasants were paying.
The shogun didn't tolerate dissidents, especially any who looked to Jesus for help. He sent his troops to Shimabara to quell the rebellion. But for 4 bloody months, even as food ran out, the rebels managed to hold off the government attacks. The shogun was so incensed at the continuing rebellion that he asked the Dutch to send a ship with cannons against the besieged castle.
The Dutch were reluctant to take part in this campaign, but nevertheless they desperately wanted to hold on to this toehold which they had in trade with Japan. And so if they didn't obey the order of the shogun, he might well say, well, okay, you can pack up and go home.
The shogun ordered the castle set ablaze. Still, the rebels fought back. But in the end, their fate was sealed.
And the castle fell finally through starvation. And then followed a dreadful slaughter. And that was the last battle, really, in Japanese history.
The Shimabara Rebellion was the excuse the shogun needed to finally eradicate Christianity from Japan.
The shogun decided draconian measures. We will cut off Japan from all Christian influence. Now, how can you do that? We will isolate Japan. These foreigners, of course, so much trouble, I suppose he was thinking. They are an unnecessary complication to our life. So why not try to preserve Japanese society as is now? We don't want changes.
The third shogun issued laws restricting travel outside of the country. On penalty of death, no Japanese could leave Japan, and those who were already abroad could not return. To ensure his edicts were obeyed, he destroyed all ships of seagoing capacity. Then he forbade the entry of any ship of European origin. Only the Dutch were allowed to stay and trade, but with severe restrictions.
The maritime restrictions are designed to prevent any unauthorized contact with the outside world. They're designed to control trade, and they're designed to prevent Christian missionaries from reaching Japan and being able to proselytize. And they form the bedrock of Tokugawa foreign policy for the life of the shogunate, which is sometimes called the beginning of the isolation of Japan.
Two years later, in defiance of the shogun's ban, an official Portuguese trade delegation arrived in Japan. The shogun showed no mercy and ordered the execution of 57 of those aboard, ambassadors and their crew. He ordered the ship burned. The few survivors were sent back with this warning.
A similar penalty will be suffered by all who come to these shores from Portugal, whether they be ambassadors or sailors, whether they come by error or driven by storm. Even more, if the King of Portugal or even the God of the Christians were to come, they would all pay the very same penalty.
The doors of Japan clanged shut and were not opened again to the West for 200 years. The will of the shogun had prevailed. But many wondered how this isolated empire would survive in a rapidly changing world.